We have been going through the Gospel of Matthew, looking at Jesus and his interactions with his disciples, the lessons he was trying to teach to his disciples, and asking the question of how do those lessons apply to us today as his current day disciples. And we find ourselves today at the very end of Matthew chapter 16. And I'm reading from the English Standard Version, starting in verse 24. He says, "Then Jesus told his disciples, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom.'" There's a lot here. Actually, there's a ton here, and we're going to talk about it. Let's just take it verse by verse. Verse 28 at the end there may be one of the hardest verses in the Bible. And so we're going to have some fun with that today. But let's start at the start. In verse 24, "Then Jesus told his disciples, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.'" This is a reminder to us that the Christian faith, the idea of following Christ, is one that we put off our own desires. We put off our own worldly wants and self, in a sense, and we're willing to follow Christ and sacrifice those things for his glory and his purposes. We see this talked about throughout the New Testament. Romans comes to mind, where it talks about how we're to, we either feed the spirit or we feed the body, feed the flesh, and how as Christians we need to be sacrificial in that sense and be willing to follow him, For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. There's a sense of value here, right? There's a sense of, if you think before you knew God, before you were a Christian, the way that you valued your life, the way you valued your comforts, the way that you valued your dreams and your desires and the possessions that you had and the position and status you would have had in your culture. There's a lot of different things that we value that we could put into that category of life. And it's saying whoever, tries to hold on to that, they'll actually lose it. That their life will be fleeting. There will be no real sense to it. But if you're willing to lose your life, if you're willing to lose those things for the kingdom of God in order to follow him and give them up, that you might follow what Christ would have for you, then you'll actually find life. You'll find life in the fullest, as the Bible says. And that you'll realize that those dreams and desires and passions and all these things that you had when you were of the world are actually minimalistic. Like they're not important. They're of no substance. There's no depth to them in comparison when they're put next to the will of God and pleasing God and worshiping him and knowing him and following his will for your life. "For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?" And so once again here we just see this idea that if you're willing to give up your soul for your own desires, what's really going to come of that? There's no eternal benefit to that. There's nothing. It's fleeting. It's in the moment. It might, seem good at that time, but it's fleeting. And so the decision to follow Christ is of much more value. Then it says, "For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done." This kind of paints the imagery, especially when we have the whole Bible, right? We're not just stuck in that moment with the disciples and Christ, but we have the whole Bible to reflect on. And we can see the second coming of Christ. We can see the day of judgment, the day of the Lord that will be, that every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess. We will stand before God and have to give an account of what we've done, and justice will be measured there. And those with Christ, will walk in forgiveness and grace. and those outside of Christ will face the consequences of their sinful actions. But then the next verse, and I've been wrestling with this for some time here. It says, "Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." And if you think about that, if you think about that verse for any period of time, you might come to the conclusion that this is confusing, this is difficult. What is he saying here? What is this? So in some skeptics of the Christian faith, or even atheists or enemies of the Christian faith, they will actually take this verse and say that this is evidence that this is a faulty religion, that this is contradicting, because all of these people that Jesus was talking to, they all died, and he hasn't returned yet. No, and we'll talk about that. This might be a longer video. There's some that hold to the idea that this is talking about his death and resurrection, and that is the second coming that they're referring to. And there's that, and once again, I'm not there with them. There's some that hold to the idea that the second coming, this is kind of like a preterist view, the second coming was in 70 AD when Jerusalem was destroyed. Once again, I'm not there with them. I don't see that. I don't hold to that. And if that is the case, well, where is the judgment? Where was Jesus in that? Like the coming of Christ, we don't really see that. One of the most common views, and I think this is where I will land, is if you look into chapter 17, the very next thing, and we'll talk about this in our coming video, but is the Transfiguration of Christ. Him and some couple of the disciples, they go on this journey up this mountain, and up there he's transfigured. His appearance changes, his clothing changes. A cloud comes over with a booming voice from heaven declaring that this is the Son of God. Listen to him. And then you have, I believe it's Moses and Elijah there, who come, and the disciples respond with, this is so wonderful, this is so great. Let's build 3 tabernacles, one for you, Lord, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Let's not leave this place. And we'll talk about that in our next one. But I think that's what we see here in verse 28 is a reference to that. And there's a number of reasons why. And so let's talk about that. For example, he says, "Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until." And so it's not a statement of, you're going to be whizzed away into heaven and you're not going to experience death. It's not that. It's saying that, you are going to be reserved from death until this happens. And then after this happens, then you will die. It's like saying to a kid, you're not going to have dessert until you eat your vegetables. And it's not to say you'll never have dessert, but rather that once you've completed that step, then now you are eligible for dessert. And so there's some idea that maybe that was the idea of the Transfiguration. And so that these 3 disciples, they didn't die, and then they have that moment with Christ, and then now they can die after that. That's only 6 days later. Another idea maybe would be with John, right, who wrote the book of Revelation. And so he's attempted to be killed. He's put into a huge pot of boiling oil, and he doesn't die. Like, they tried to kill him and it didn't work. And so they put him out on this desert island, and there he had this vision of the glory of God, of the end times, of the Son of God coming and bringing judgment and all these other things, which we can see here. And then it's after that then he is now able to die, and he does die. And so that's kind of a thought. What we don't see, though, is the idea of the second coming here. And why is that? Is because there is the statement that, this will take place and then you will die. Because in the second coming of Christ, we have this picture of Christ coming, and then those who are in Christ on the earth, they will not taste death. In fact, they will go to heaven with Christ in that moment. And so death is something that that group will not experience. And so this verse cannot be talking about them, because that just doesn't fit with the rest of it. It's it's kind of a confusing verse. So truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. What I do want to mention is just those two ideas, the idea of the Transfiguration or the idea of John in the book of Revelation. Because and an example that I can kind of use to try and get the imagery and get the idea out there is that of a movie. I find today that a lot of movies, when they come out, the trailers, they tell too much of the story. And so, in fact, I avoid trailers for movies that I know I'm going to want to see like crazy. For example, Spider-Man. Spider-Man is my favorite superhero. And anytime a movie comes out for him, I know I'm going to see it. I'm going to want to see it. And so I don't look at any trailers. I even avoid posters or interviews or anything that has to do with the film because I want to see it firsthand and not have it kind of spoiled for me. In a similar way, much more grander way, obviously, is this futuristic idea that we have from the Bible of the second coming of Christ. Of being in the presence of God in all of his glory, in seeing his power, in seeing the Father working through him, in seeing the angels and judgment and heaven coming down on the new earth and all of this stuff. And that's phenomenal. And what I think we can see is with the Transfiguration or with John in the book of Revelation, we can see almost that they had a sneak peek, that they had a look at a trailer before it came out kind of thing. They had this sneak peek. And what was incredible is their reaction to it. The disciples at the Transfiguration basically said, allow us to build structures, temples, tabernacles, that we won't have to leave this place. We don't want to leave. We want to stay here forever. This is too good to move on from. We want to just be here in your presence, how you are. There was something about it that was so magnificent, so wonderful, that everything in them just wanted to be there in that moment. And then you have John in Revelation and that picture there, and just the fullness of Christ and the wonder of Christ and the fear and the trembling, but also the awe. And for me, when I read Revelation and I see the picture of the throne room of Christ there, and just the description, it usually brings me to tears. Just this sense of awe of my God and this desire to be there. And so the application of what to pull from this verse is kind of difficult because truly, fully, I don't know what it's saying. It could say this, it could say that. Those two ideas, either the Transfiguration or Revelation, I think those are the strongest, and that's what I would hold to. These other things, the preterist view, or that it was in the death, or that it was the second coming fully, I'm not there. I don't see that. I don't see that lining up. But it does have this idea of this awe-inspiring expectation of God, of Christ in all of his glory, and that I'm looking forward to that moment. And that I actually, this is an odd statement to say, but that I look forward to death. Not that I want to rush to it, not that I'm not satisfied with my life here, or that I like, my family or my living, or that I want to serve God in this moment. But that I do look forward to the day where I get to stand in front of Christ and behold him in all of his glory and all of his wonder and be fully in the presence of God and stand there. And like the disciples, I imagine my response will be, I do not want to leave this moment. I do not want to leave this presence. I want to be here fully. Yeah. And so I think that's what we can pull from it, is just this desire to be with God. And if we work this in reverse, this whole section of text, so we look at 28 and we can see this signaling to the fullness of God, this signaling to the Son of Man coming in all of his glory. And then we look back and we see this idea of, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. And if we truly have the full picture of Christ painted out of how wondrous he is, how much glory he deserves and praise he deserves and honor he deserves, and that there's nothing like him, and that should be our chief desire in life. well then I'm more than willing to lay down my life. I'm more than willing to take up my cross and follow him. Why wouldn't I? There's nothing on earth, there's nothing I can imagine that would be of more value to follow than that. And so let me encourage you, if you're having difficulty of laying your own worldly passions down, if you're having difficulties in following Christ, in sacrificing things for his kingdom and his purposes, just remind yourself of the greatness of Christ. It's similar to, just think of someone that you love, right? There's certain things in my life that I really value. There's certain activities and time, and certain time of the year that there's things that I enjoy doing and I value, or monetary resources or hobbies or plans or whatever. And for some people, people that I hardly know, or an engagement or an opportunity to do something that I don't value as much, I'm not willing to give that up. I'm not willing to give up the thing that I value in order for this other thing to take place. But for my wife, well, yeah, I am. I love her more than any other human on this earth, and so I'm willing to give those things up. And when I look at the greatness of Christ, and my love for him should be beyond everything else imaginable, I'm willing to give everything up to be in that moment, to see him in all of his glory, to stand with him, to be united with him. And so I would encourage you, if you are having difficulty in sacrificing the world, sacrificing your desires, your wants, all these other things for Christ, just remind yourself of that greatness. Read the next account in chapter 17 of the Transfiguration. Go to Revelation and read the imagery of him in his throne room. Read the Gospels. Sit down and read an entire Gospel in one sitting and just take in the glory of God, his greatness. Pray to him and seek him and realize that he's worthy. He's absolutely worthy. I hope that's encouraging to you guys today. If you have any questions at all about that text, I would encourage you, if you're one of our Lifesong people, to physically talk to me about it. And if necessary, you can email, but it's a conversation that I think is better to have face-to-face kind of thing. I love you guys, and I hope you have a great week. Honor God in all that you do.